Every election cycle, it comes up. What to do about the LCBO? It's valuable, lining the province's coffers with nearly $2 billion annually, and that's not including the taxes it brings in as well. But there's also a moral question to be asked. Should the Ontario government have a role in supplying alcohol to Ontarians? Joining us now to help answer that, in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, via Skype, Peter Sherman, the former Progressive Conservative finance critic and the member for Thornhill. And with us here in the studio, Greg Sorbera, former Ontario Finance Minister and the member for Vaughan, Howard Hampton, former leader of the Ontario NDP and the member for Kenora-Rainy River, Pauline Thompson, the Green Party of Ontario candidate in the riding of Scarborough-Agincourt, and Martin Redcon, the Queen's Park columnist at the Toronto Star. We want to let you know that you can be part of this conversation. Our producers Kara Stern and Daniel Kitts are hosting a live chat right now, so you can join us on the homepage, theagenda.tvo.org. Chime in, use the hashtag AgendaTVO. Great to have you four around the table here. And Peter Sherman, it's nice to see you on the line from Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I'll start with you. Tim Hudak has been saying essentially for the last couple of years, if he gets in, he will do something with the LCBO, privatize it, take it out of government hands. He confirmed yesterday that's now a back burner position. Why the change, do you think?
Well, I'm not in Tim Hudak's head or in his confidence anymore, so I can't say. But I suspect that his team decided that it was a fairly populist discussion, and that it was best left as something to do after they get elected, if indeed they do get elected. I'm here because I worked that file for a very long time and was there when the discussion with Tim was, do we do this or do we not do this in terms of going forward with a platform? And I guess we now know the decision. My view was that it was a good piece to bring in, and that it still is.
Greg Sorbera, we wanted you here because, a couple of reasons actually. You're a former consumer minister from 25 years ago or so. You also, I think when you were finance minister, ordered a task force to look into whether or not you should do something with the LCBO.
Yep, one of the first things.
So what do you think you should do?
Well, the fact is that most people in Ontario are quite happy with the way in which we sell beverage alcohol.
How do you know that?
Well, we know that because polling year after year after year indicates a very high level of satisfaction. Privatization of the LCBO has a lot of advocates, but it would give rise to two things. First of all, it would have people in the retail part of the business selling it at much lower wages. Is it a good thing to have people's wages go down? And secondly, it would probably, likely, enhance availability. Let's have it in the grocery stores, let's have separate liquor stores. And there's not a real appetite in Ontario for forcing people who have well-paying jobs with good pensions to start working at $12 and $13 an hour. And there's not a real lot of appetite for people to say, you know what, I need to be able to buy a bottle of gin someplace at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's not really important to the people of the province.
Howard Hampton, when you were in power, did you look at this?
No.
Do you think anything should be done about it?
No, I think it works quite well. I mean, let's face it, a government today that is hard-pressed to find cash gets about $2.3 billion a year from the LCBO.
That's profits and taxes.
That's profit, taxes, excise fees. That's a pretty good chunk of change when you're trying to pay for the public services we need. Secondly, as somebody who doesn't come from the big city, I can tell you that growing up in a small town, all right, where at my age, drinking underage was the rage, right? The LCBO operated a very, very responsible outfit. Everybody who boasted about, hey, I'm 17 and I got booze on the weekend. Well, you sure didn't get it from the LCBO. You got challenged as soon as you went in the door. In a small town, they look at you and say, I know your dad, right? On all sorts of fronts, the LCBO operates well. It gets tremendous prices from the companies that it purchases from because it's one of the largest operators in the world.
I think it's the biggest purchaser of booze in the world.
It is. So they get tremendous economies of scale, tremendous efficiency. And now, growing up a little older, when I'm at home, I know I can go to the LCBO, and if I want a certain kind of Canadian wine or French wine, I merely have to tell the LCBO, and they'll get it.
Pauline, where are you on this? And the Greens?
Well, the Greens believe that the LCBO should carry on as is for now, but that's not because we lack faith in store owners to be able to sell alcohol to people who are of age or not and deny it to those who are minors. So there's no lack of faith in terms of their ability to sell this. It's more that it's a revenue generator, it's making money, and we need that money for healthcare and education. But we have a very different take on the beer store, which is a government-endorsed monopoly. And I have to wonder if the position of the other parties is in any way influenced by the fact that they receive major donations from Brewers Retail, from Molson Coors, from the three owners of Brewers Retail. You know, they're all major.
Okay, hold that thought.
Sorry.
I do want to come back to that.
Okay.
I can tell we're into it already. Okay, hold that thought because we are going to come back to it. But Martin, you've obviously written a lot about this and you've looked at the issues and studied them over the years and you've heard the differing positions here at the table today. Have you come to any conclusions about what ought to happen?
Well, I think the LCBO is a special case. It's almost as if Greg Sorbara and Howard Hampton have reversed roles. Greg is worried about protecting union jobs, and Howard Hampton is being the prudent steward of our province's finances. They're both right. I agree more with Howard than with Greg. I don't think we should hold the province hostage because in order to retain unionized jobs, as much as I support those, I belong to a union, but you can't make everybody play the LCBO's way just in order to keep those jobs. What I would say overall, though, is I think we have to be practical and not ideological about it. $1.7 billion a year dividend, which means profit, is a very practical consideration. If you break up the LCBO, if you atomize it like that, you lower its overall value. Even if the government kept a share or licensed it out to private sellers, they wouldn't be able to have that stranglehold effectively on the market. So the actual tax revenue that people think most about is, I think, in the order of $3 or so billion, but most, or $2 billion, I should say, but most of that goes to the federal government and municipalities. The province's tax take is only about $400 million a year. So it's the retail markup that gives them a lot of money. And there's a lot that's wrong with the LCBO, but there's a lot that's wrong with most retailers and organizations. We could criticize it, and I'm happy to do that. In general, though, you'll find most people think it's not that bad. And so if it ain't broke, don't try to.
Let me go back to I'm going to go back to Peter Sherman on this because I know you guys made the argument that you could sell it and still realize as much revenue for the provincial treasury as you do now by keeping it. Obviously, that's a tough sell for some people, but why do you think that's the case?
Well, you take a look at the model. What we use is an import, warehousing, distribution, and then retail model. In other words, it's vertical. The bulk of the profitability, and I think that a former finance minister like Greg Sorbara could support this, comes in the import. For example, if you bring in a bottle of Jim Beam, which is a low-end bourbon from the States, it lands at about $5. It immediately gets marked up by about $150 on import. Now it sits in the warehouse. Then it gets a retail markup, it gets HST, and all of this accrues to the government. So what we were looking at is the Alberta model, and the Alberta model is a situation where the government is responsible for the importation, it's responsible for the warehousing, and it distributes. But beyond that scope, you would look at a retail chain that wouldn't really be a chain at all. It would be a number of independent sellers which would compete and therefore offer a wider selection and would be in close proximity to almost everybody in the province. And that was the reason to be looking at it. And I still think it has some validity and should be explored. However, there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. Pauline brought up the issue of beer stores, and I guess we'll get to that later.
Did you not feel any queasiness when you were the Treasurer of Ontario, depending on people to drink more in order to fund the healthcare and education commitments that you made?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
Well, firstly, because one of the things that the LCBO does is be a responsible retailer. And the other thing that the government shouldn't be doing is being a preacher of on the moral issues. The LCBO is a very profitable organization because it's well run, because there's a good market. The LCBO does a good job of marketing. But I can't remember one discussion where the issue was, well, you know, we shouldn't be encouraging the sale of beverage alcohol to make more revenue because that's not good for the people. We did have those discussions regularly and often on the whole question of tobacco taxes and the retailing of tobacco. And we, on a number of occasions, raised taxes on tobacco with the purpose of getting people to smoke less, notwithstanding that the government depended mightily on revenues from tobacco taxes.
Howard, I mean, when you were in government, the money just wasn't coming in the way you hoped it was. I mean, were there days when you wanted people to drink twice as much because that would bring in twice as much money?
No, I think.
But that relationship is established if the government's in the business.
No, that's a red herring. Look, you go into any LCBO store, and if you look like you have had too much to drink, they won't sell to you. You go into any LCBO store, and there's 5 teenagers outside, and you've just been talking to them, chances are they won't sell to you. You go into the store and you look like you're underage yourself, you'll be challenged. So in terms of responsible marketing, which I think you want to have with something like this, the LCBO does the job. The fact that, yes, Ontarians like to drink a beer once in a while, like to drink a glass of wine with supper, or maybe a scotch before they go to bed, or a shot of rye before they go to bed, is their business.
No, but government depends on people drinking as much as is responsible right now to pay for programs.
No, let's turn it around the other way.
Sure.
Okay. Alcohol has some good aspects. It has some bad aspects. What you're trying to do here, what the LCBO originally got into, was a controlled and responsible sale of something that the public wants. And I think it does a marvelous job of that. A wonderful job of it, probably the best job you could find anywhere in North America. Peter talks about the Alberta example. I think that there are lots of examples in Alberta of holdups of small liquor stores, and also lots of examples of people drinking and driving, because I don't think you get the same responsible sale of alcohol. There it is driven by how much can I bring in the door.
Let me get Martin on that. Go ahead.
I think we can reconcile this by saying the government doesn't actively try to encourage irresponsible drinking, but there's no question in my mind, at least in recent years, perhaps post-Sorbera, they have been trying to build out the stores at a very rapid pace because they can see the correlation.
Did you see the papers today? Did you get your insert today, LCBO
Yes.
insert today?
We can talk about that later, because that's one of my bugaboos.
I know it is.
Heavy, glossy, thick.
Yeah. Encouraging you to drink.
Encouraging you to drink, but also full of irrelevant food menus and so on that I get a lot of mail
But
about.
they make a lot of money on those advertisements.
You say that.
Your
but
paper and the government.
You say that, but they actually hit up the suppliers to pay for them. So it shows up as a profit on the LCBO's books. But I hear from the suppliers, the wine people, who are, it's not a free lunch. Maybe you've never heard that expression, treasurer, but somebody's paying for that absurdly heavy paper stock. But let's set that aside.
We'll be sure to keep it out of the Toronto Daily Star in the future.
We're fearless.
Can we cut to the chase on
Please.
this, though? Look, does anybody around this table think that Ontario can afford to throw, $2.3 billion or a portion of $2.3 billion away right now?
Well, Peter Sherman thinks you could realize more if you privatized.
No, I don't think you can, because look, if you got $2.3 billion there and you're going to bring in somebody else, okay, all right, then somebody's going to have to give something up. Either the government's going to have to take less, or workers are going to take less.
And it's the workers, Howard. It's the workers.
Does anybody
that are
think
gonna get the hit.
that Ontario is going to be better off by having more low-paid workers?
Peter, I think you need to speak to that.
For that.
I would be happy to, and I don't think that. But I'm listening to Howard, who I respect greatly, but he's giving me and everybody else the stereotypical NDP view. Why is it that we have to have something that's run by the government in place of something that's run by the private sector? Why is it that you don't believe that there are responsible people in the private sector who will pay appropriately, who will market appropriately, who will provide the proper carding and identification so that they're not selling to minors? Look, the death rate in the province of Ontario from alcohol-related accidents, and they're not really accidents when you think about it, is very low. It's 2 per 100,000. In New York State, where everything is privatized and beer is sold in supermarkets, it's 1.8. So I don't think that you're contributing to anybody's delinquency by doing it. And I do think that they're responsible retailers.
And I want to answer Peter's question. Peter, I grew up in a border town. I could go to the LCBO in my town when I was 18 and try to get liquor, and I'd be refused. I could go immediately across the border to International Falls, Minnesota, where there are 10 small liquor stores, and I could probably get beer or alcohol at any of them because they were anxious to make a sale.
But Howie, those were Americans.
It doesn't matter.
They don't have our fine moral of standing.
Look, I think on the LCBO, I think Howard's right actually on what the bottom line is. The bottom line is the $1.7 billion in profit. The tax would stay more or less the same, but the profit, even Tim Hudak couldn't, when he's trying to to balance the budget up in record time, he's not able to forego $1.7 billion. So
Which is why he backburnered it. Okay, let me get Pauline on this, and then we're going to talk beer.
I'm just wondering, are we satisfied with the way it's run? Are we satisfied that they're making as much money as possible? And what is, in fact, the cost to our healthcare system for alcoholism and addiction? Does anyone know that answer? Sorry.
No, that's...
I know you're supposed to ask the questions. Please.
We have freedom of speech here. You can say whatever you like with the time that you have. Do you think there is reason for us to be concerned about undue alcoholism as a result of LCBO sales?
I think it would be intriguing to know how much of the profit made from the LCBO goes to actually fixing a problem it creates.
I don't know that number.
Just about half of it. Just about half of it. Because
Wow.
half of all provincial revenues go to healthcare. Yeah. And so a large chunk of the money that comes into the government through the LCBO comes into general revenues, and almost 50% of that goes to healthcare. Now, not all of it goes to alcohol-related healthcare, but a mighty portion.
I believe that the LCBO would say that a certain portion goes directly also to those things. But I don't think we can extrapolate that privatizing that keeping the LCBO in place would necessarily change that rate of consumption.
Okay, let me jump in here because I don't want the clock to get too far away from us before we start talking about beer sales and accessibility of various brands to the way that it's distributed right now in the province of Ontario. And Martin, I want you to start on this as well. I think, all of us in journalism have been hearing a lot from the craft people who say, it's an unfair system, we don't get access. Is the system as open and available to all players today as it ought to be?
Sorry, LCBO or the beer store?
Pick 'em.
Okay, because the LCBO does sell beer as well. They have 20% of the market, and the beer store has the other 80%. The craft brewers are very ambiguous in their position. They don't like to jump in with the convenience stores because they don't like the idea of being hived off in corner stores where they wouldn't get lots of distribution. They are well represented in the beer store, but they have to pay stocking fees, and some of them complain about that. But we have to be realistic. They would also have to pay fees to the big retailers and Costco and others. And by the way, the LCBO and Costco keep alternating in terms of who is the biggest purchaser in the world. That goes up and down. Where the craft brewers get a raw deal, either way, in the beer store is in display prominence, because the beer store, we must remind our viewers, is owned by 3 of the biggest foreign-owned brewers. The Canadian brewers that they represent are essentially Molson's, Labatt's, and Sleeman's. They get the most prominent display on balance, especially in the express sections and the coolers and things like that. And so the craft beers get short shrift. Now, it's hard for craft beers to demand preeminence, but if you have specialty stores and other kinds of outlets that have cropped up in Quebec, you can find a craft beer specialty store that would give them some prominence and display them not in terms of the bribes that they get for retail shelf space, but in terms of their merit and what the market's really demanding.
Howard, is there something can be done here?
Well, I think there should be more opportunity for the craft breweries, but what I've found is if you're looking for a craft beer, you'll often find it at the LCBO.
Yes, that's true.
And so I think the beer store is actually missing out on a market, right? Because people like me who say, that's a nice beer, I'll go to the LCBO and get it. I think the people who operate the beer store, if they were smart, would say, hey, we're taking everybody. We want to, because there is a market there, and there's a growing market for craft beers.
But they're deeply conflicted because if they were disinterested, if they were an objective retailer trying to enhance the retail experience, they would encourage browsing. Remember browsing? You go into a store, you see a beer you hadn't seen before. The beer store is designed to discourage browsing. It asks you to have a pre-formed idea of what you want to buy based on marketing, national advertising, and that's what sells the craft beer brewers short.
Which is why the LCBO's sale of beer is growing faster than their sale of wine and faster than their sale of spirits.
Well, as much as I'm satisfied with the model of the LCBO and think it works actually quite well, I am very strongly opposed to the model of the beer stores. Number one, Martin makes the point. Why is it in this area we give the right to retail to a small 3-company power block to control and make a significant profit on the sale of all beer? Second point is that I would warrant that 50 or 60 or maybe 70% of the people in Ontario think that the beer store is owned by the government.
Indeed.
And it's just yet another way in which the government distributes alcohol.
Okay, can I ask the follow-up here, though? 30 years ago, almost, when you were part of the David Peterson government and promised to put beer and wine in the corner stores. You could have made this problem go away, but you looked at it and decided not to do it. Why?
We need to do a whole program on that because
does it get back to what Pauline was saying?
No. Well, it's partly the power of the major players. It was partly the problem of the free trade agreement, which was coming into place. And if you do that, you have to allow all U.S. beers the same access in the grocery store as you have in the beer stores. And our brewers were domestic and very powerful at that time. And I think, although I haven't thought this all the way through, I think the beer stores should belong to the LCBO. I think if we're going to have a government monopoly, then it should be a real government monopoly. And given the success of the LCBO in retailing beverage alcohol, why don't they take the whole thing on? They could transform the beer stores and maybe give those craft brewers and all brewers a sort of equal footing in the beer market.
Peter Sherman, where are you on this?
I was with Greg Sorbera until he got to the.
You don't like the expropriation part.
The retailing of beer. Look, I've been on this one for a very long time, and you're 100% correct, Greg. This is a monopoly owned by 3, we can even call it 2.5 companies, none of which is Ontario or even Canadian based. People drink beer routinely in the summer. They drink it all year. And drunks who are on the road get drunk in bars. They don't get drunk from the 6-pack or the 2-4 that they bring home to have while they're doing burgers and dogs with the family or with friends. And I think that we're behind the times. If I'm not mistaken, we're the only jurisdiction in North America where you can't go to the supermarket, much less the corner store, and just buy your 6-pack. Then there are other mitigating circumstances, things like shift workers who work 4 to midnight. Do you know that 1 o'clock in the morning is their evening? So why can't they pick up a 6-pack on the way home? There are so many arguments, and that's before you get to the issue of price and markup.
Pauline Thompson, maybe you want to make that point about political contributions at this point?
Well, yeah, there's that issue. I have to wonder, if this is such a good idea, why it hasn't been done by any of the status quo parties so far. And I've come across tables that say that the parties receive up to $300,000 annually from Brewers Retail, from Molson's. Like if you siphon through and pick out every possible way in which they can make a donation, not just to the party in general, but to leadership campaigns or to individual candidates. There's a lot of money being donated and buried in there.
Are you raising this because you wish the Greens had a piece of that action, or because?
It would be nice, but.
I was going to say, in 24 years, I must have missed something.
Well, and so the NDP, the PCs, and the Liberals all receive donations, but the Liberals for sure receive the lion's share of those donations.
Because they're in government.
More than 2/3, yeah. And I haven't gone back. I've only done the last year looking at those numbers. So it has to make you wonder if this has never happened because they're a very powerful monopoly that are able to exercise influence.
Yeah, but it's not because of political donations. It's because of the resistance.
I think there should be no corporate donations. I think it corrupts the system.
Well, that's another question. But there still is a good deal of resistance in the Ontario public to having beer readily available in corner stores, even amongst people who go to Florida or go to California and they buy it. But when they come home, there's no real appetite for it. They don't think, oh my God, I wish we could buy a 6-pack at the local convenience store. If that were the case, we would have changes.
So much the convenience store. I'm thinking about the craft brewers who are really suffering from this monopoly because it's like, being Toyota and being forced to sell your cars through GM. They're being forced to sell their product through their competitor.
No quarrel with that.
And that's unfair. And they really should be allowed the opportunity. Regulation should be changed immediately to allow them to open up their own retail outlets.
I'm down to my last half minute. Martin, make the point.
Only about 17% of Ontarians know that the beer store is foreign-owned. When more of them find out about that, about 2/3 would like it to be liberalized, to allow for broader retail consumption. Look, I think beer is a low alcohol content product. I think people are more comfortable with it. That would be a good way to start the liberalization process. The LCBO more or less works. The stores are pleasant. It's a nice retail experience. There's no clamor for that. The beer store, there's more of a revolt in the making.
Okay, Martin Redcon, you hang around because we're not done with you yet. For the rest of you, your work here is done. Peter Sherman in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and to our guests here in the studio, thanks for coming into TVO tonight. Appreciate your time.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.